Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, assalamu alaikum. Welcome everybody to MACFEST 2024 again. Today we're saying hello from the UK, from Australia, America and France. Wherever you're joining us from, tell us in the chat. Also, if you have any questions or any thoughts, please put them all in the chat or in the Q&A portal. Today we've got a very special event. Islamophobia and Muslims in the media. Before we start the event, I would just like to say thank you very much for all your donations. We do rely on them to create more of these really good and interesting events for you every year. And we are just in the process of putting together MACFEST 2025, but we still have good few events coming up. So please take a look on Eventbrite, stay connected with us on social media. MACFEST is on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and TikTok. And use our hashtag #SpreadHoney_not_hate. Also, we've got MACFEST Arts Awards. The process is now open. If you're Muslim and you're an artist or a creative and you would like to submit your works, you can do it for free on MACFEST website. So today, our host for today is Dr. Myriam Francois. She's just the best person to host this event. I cannot think about anybody else better. She's been called recently the Warrior Queen. I'm sure she can tell us a little bit more about that. And just very quickly, she's got a really impressive bio. She is an award-winning Franco-Irish journalist, filmmaker, and writer. And I'll just leave it at that. And over to you, Myriam. You're muted.
That would be the one. You'd need me to unmute to be able to hear me. So first of all, thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Thank you to MACFEST for asking me to host this, as you say, really important event. The Warrior Queen comment, I don't know, I guess it's just because we are in a state of, a global war against hatred, division, greed, with a front line obviously in Gaza right now. So many of us feeling very invested in that. So free Palestine, let's open with that. Today, we're going to be discussing Islamophobia and Muslims in the media. Just to be absolutely clear, I think that actually this is going to feed into a lot of the wider discussions around the treatment of movements of resistance against the Israeli genocide and the representation of Muslims just more generally in the media. So for this topic, we have a really esteemed panel from all around the world. And I'm really thrilled because unfortunately, that the reality is that Islamophobia is a global issue which has different permutations wherever we look. Hi Samira. So let me start out by asking our guests to each introduce themselves and say a few words about their background and their kind of connection to the topic, and maybe an opening statement, 2-3 minutes on the state of Islamophobia and Muslims in the media. Samina, Yasmeen, maybe I could ask you to start.
Okay, thank you very much, and really honored to be invited to this panel. I teach international relations at the University of Western Australia, which is in Perth, and I run the Center for Muslim States and Societies there. So most of my work when it comes to Muslims in the West has focused on how Muslims look at the wider community they live in, but also how others look at Muslims. So it's in that context that I have looked at Islamophobia. And my reading of the Australian scene, at least, is that initially it was very slow to develop when people were talking about Islamophobia elsewhere in the world, for example, Britain or the US or even Canada to some extent. I always felt that we were in a lucky position, it wasn't there. But over a period of time, especially after the ISIS rise to power in certain parts of the Middle East, we see greater focus on Islamophobia. And more recently, with the events in Gaza and Israel, there has been a marked increase in Islamophobia. So I guess my focus really is on how does Islamophobia impact on people, those who are experiencing it, but also people who are not the target, but still see what's happening and how it shapes their opinions. But I hope when we have the discussion, we can unpack all that.
Absolutely, definitely want to hear a lot more on that. And I suspect there may be some kind of correspondent parallels that we can make with the US context, which brings me nicely on to asking Nihad Awad to please introduce himself and tell us a little bit about his connection to the topic and the state of Islamophobia and Muslims in the media in the US. Oh, you're on mute, Nihad. I've made the mistake once or twice.
Okay. Good morning, good afternoon. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be to you wherever you are. My name is Nihad Awad. I am the National Executive Director of CARE, the Council on American-Islamic Relations, based in Washington, D.C. About myself, I am a Palestinian refugee. I was born and raised in a refugee camp in Jordan. I came to the United States many, many years ago. While studying, continuing my education, I was confronted with the false images about Islam in the US media by the negative policies that I believe were maybe intentional, biased against Muslims in America. And I just decided to create an organization that will help fight back the false images about Islam and Muslims, and build an organization that will counter the mistreatment of Muslims and fight discrimination. The organization has become the largest Muslim civil rights and advocacy organization in the United States, with about 35 offices in the main cities and states. So yeah, there's a lot to talk about. So I look forward to the discussion and to your questions as well.
Thank you so much for that, Nihad. Samira, I can see that you're walking. Are you able to still give us a little intro? I think, are you outside SOAS? I think you might be. Let's hear from Samira.
Hi, sorry, I hope people can hear me. Yeah, unfortunately, I would have liked to have been somewhere a bit more appropriate for the meeting, but I'm actually just in central London opposing Tommy Robinson and the far right. So hopefully that's a good enough excuse that I'm opposing Islamophobia as to why I'm outside. And yeah, I hope people can hear me all right. But yeah, just a bit of introduction about myself. My name's Samira. I'm a student, or I've literally just finished university. I'm an anti-racist activist. I've been involved in organisations like Stand Up to Racism, who's like putting on this protest today. I'm also, like I'd say, like a Palestine student activist, and have been in occupations at my university for Palestine in the latest like round of student encampments and occupations and so on. Yeah, no, I think this is going to be a really good meeting, and obviously a really crucial topic. I think clearly, like others have said, the intensification of Islamophobia has been seen, you know, in the backlash to the war on Gaza and as justification for that. And, you know, we've seen the media very much, you know, parroting the government's stance on support for Israel and so on, and, you know, using demonization of Muslims within that. But I think also, you know, when we look at the general election, you know, a very racist government, you know, kind of scrapping around for votes, using the Rwanda campaign and so on, I think it's, you know, connected to much larger, you know, a much larger trend of the rise of Islamophobia in Britain. So yeah, that's my name.
Fantastic. And we appreciate scholars who understand that scholarship is not just for the ivory towers, but has to be taken to the streets. So Samira, thank you so much for that. Last but not least, Lulu, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your connection to the subject and your thoughts around it?
Hello, everyone. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you, MACFEST, for bringing up this amazing topic. It's so much to talk about, but as you mentioned, Myriam, like everyone, when everyone brings their own story in the table, makes it more interesting when it comes to Islamophobia. I'm born and raised in Albania, so I'm originally from Albania. Currently, I'm living in London. I came before 3 years to study a master's degree in global human resources management, but in fact, my whole experience till now is media. So I've been working as a radio host, working in different positions in media. I've been working in communication departments. And in my life, I have faced a lot the sensitive feeling of being in a table with Islamophobic, like people who don't like basically Islam. So there is much to talk about it, but very quickly, I want to introduce myself. What do I do now? I'm a TV host, TV producer, and I do some freelance related with some events, helping them to coordinate stage management, etc. And I'm more than happy to be part of this panel.
It's going to keep catching me out. Amazing. Thank you so much to everyone for their opening statements. Just with regards to you guys in the audience, if there are questions that you want to ask, please start popping them in the chat, and as we go, I'll try and make sure we integrate them as much as I can. So I want to ask you, Samina, to start out with, when it comes to Islamophobia, are we looking at one thing with different permutations, or is it separate phenomena with different roots in different countries? How do you conceive of Islamophobia? What's the root of it? Is it a shared root? And how does it connect to its different forms in different places?
Well, I could talk more about how we see it in Australia, but first of all, from my point of view, Islamophobia is basically fear of Islam or Muslims. And it's based on an assumption that somehow there are elements that unite all the Muslims beyond the practicing elements, the 5 pillars, and that essentially relies on the fact that somehow Muslims are unreliable, they are not rational, they're violent, oppressive, patriarchal in their approach, misogynists, all of that put together. But I think the way people look at Muslims when they deal with others, it's not just everything together. It depends upon the area that people come from or the area that concerns them. So based on that, when they're relating to Muslims, one of those would come in and they would start treating Muslims differently. So I do remember, and I think at some stage I thought it was very funny. Now I look back and I think there was probably a lot of problems. I got married some 30 years ago, and I remember some time after that, at our place, someone came to raise some funds. So me being me, I said, please come on in. And she came in and she was sitting there, and I made her a cup of tea. And then as we started talking, she asked me where I was from. And when I said Pakistan, so she guessed, she said, so you're Muslim? I said, yes. So her question was, what are you doing here? And this is pre 9/11. And I'm just thinking, I'm getting you a cup of tea. That's what I'm doing here. But I said, what do you mean? And her response was, you're a Muslim. Shouldn't you be fighting a jihad? And so when you look at that, at that time, I found it funny because I thought, what kind of an image is that? But now when I look at it, I think there are images that people carry or they're brought up with, sometimes consciously, at other times just subconsciously in the system, and they internalize those images. When developments take place either in their own country or around the world or in a region that they're more focused on, that information feeds into the way they look at this image of Muslims, and the negativity can be reinforced. So if you look at sort of just in case of what's happened in the last 25 years or so, the image of Muslims was not positive because in UK already Islamophobia had become an element that people discussed. But I think after 9/11, first people saw that it happened in the US. So even in Australia, there was a fear that somehow Muslims were a threat. But when it happened in London bombing was identified by a lot of people who are of Anglo-Celtic background in Australia to say that Muslims are bad, they're anti-white or anti-West. Bali bombing before that in 2002 had the same impact. And of course, after ISIS took over areas in Iraq and Syria, that feeling magnified. And more recently, with the developments in the Middle East, especially Gaza and Israel, the attack of the 7th of October, but then what happened afterwards, that has sort of magnified. So I guess it's a long-winded answer to say there are different variables what constitute together as a package that we can talk about in terms of Islamophobia, but how it gets activated really relies upon what's happening in the areas people live in or around that, or the areas they identify with. And so then it reinforces those images, and people start internalizing it even more.
Nihad, I'd like to bring you in and ask you about the US context. And of course, 9/11, I think for Muslims around the world was a defining moment when it comes to Islamophobia specifically. I think all of us remember the change in environment that we experienced as a community in the aftermath of that. And there's been a number of incidents, obviously, since then, which have contributed to that wider climate. I want to ask you about some of what Samina was saying there about the sort of the history and how it connects to the US context, and what are some of the specificities you would say that American Muslims are facing when it comes to Islamophobia? How does it manifest kind of in your specific context, and what are you as an organization most concerned about presently? You're on mute.
Actually, someone muted me. So hopefully they will unmute me. Okay. So the phenomenon of Islamophobia, although it is not really a recent phenomenon, the Islamophobia, as the previous guest, Samina, defined, is an old phenomenon. But however, the term is like a new term. But the fear and prejudice of Islam or of Christianity or Judaism or Islam, or it goes as deep as the fear and prejudice and rejection of people by the prophets. So over time, it has taken different shapes and different names. Today, probably the first time I hear the word Islamophobia was by an organization that was based in London, and we have adopted the same term just to describe an old phenomenon that we all lived. Having said that, I believe due to the nature and makeup of the American society being very, very diverse, and also based on the freedom of religion, freedom of thought, freedom of expression, Islamophobia has not been maybe as bad as it has been in Europe and other countries due to the history of colonization and tension, occupations, and so on and so forth. So the Muslim experience in America, I would say, has been relatively reminiscent and similar to other minorities who lived in the United States. And if we know anything about minorities in the United States, they have been, persecuted ever since their existence at the hands of the wider white, Christian evangelist community. So African Americans who were brought against their own will from African countries to come and build America, the Chinese Americans, Korean Americans, Japanese Americans, Jewish Americans, Irish Americans, Italian Americans, Mexican Americans, Asian Americans, and Muslims, they all have gone through some kind of persecution, discrimination, and stigmatization. Muslims are no different. What makes also Muslim a little bit different, actually, is the interconnectivity between Islam and Muslims all over the world. So there is a shared history. In the United States, you see Muslims from all over the world. It's like Hajj, like the pilgrimage. So we live this continuity and diversity of Islam and humanity in the Muslim community. Now, to answer your question, Islamophobia in the United States, I break it down in three ways. Number one, casual ignorance, the fear of the unknown, which exists in every society. If you do not know someone, you may be anxious, you may fear them, and that is probably the simplest way to deal with it. It comes through interaction, and hopefully once you know them, they know you, they understand that there is a lot in common than difference. Then the second one is really structural Islamophobia, which borrows from the historic conflict that you see it exist in the culture, in the popular culture, in the textbook. There have been deep roots in prejudice against certain ethnicities and religions. So obviously there's a competition between Christianity and Islam historically. So practicing Christians may see Muslims as the opponents or the competitors. The third and last one is the most dangerous form of Islamophobia, which is the organized Islamophobia that, for example, in the United States, we have studied and analyzed the phenomenon of organized Islamophobia, and we found that there are dozens of organizations who work full-time to misrepresent the public and mislead them, and they are very sophisticated, including like the pro-Israel organizations. Since the Gaza genocide, you see well-orchestrated talking points, sophisticated liars, they call them spokespeople, who try to really misrepresent the facts. And chief among them is, for example, Benjamin Netanyahu. Whenever he speaks to the Western audience or European or American audience, he always presents the conflict as us versus them. We are your representative, the Western world, in this tough neighborhood among the Palestinians and Arabs and Muslims. We are your representatives. We are fighting the savages. So that is a very sophisticated and very dangerous Islamophobia or Palestinian phobia or Arab phobia and so on. So what we do at CARE is we take the three areas very diligently, and we break them down, and we try to empower American Muslims by fighting back Islamophobia through an organizational infrastructure manner, by providing lawyers, spokespeople, organizers, and representatives. And also we help those victims of Islamophobia, whether if they are discriminated against or if they are subject to bullying or hate crime and so on. There's a lot to unpack, but I'm ready to answer, your questions and the questions from the audience.
Absolutely. We'll get to that shortly. I want to bring Dr. Samira, if she can still speak to us from the demo against Tommy Robinson, who maybe, Samira, you can start by explaining who this is, because obviously highly relevant to the conversation that we're having right now. And also, I'd really love to hear from you about the state of UK Islamophobia. I could bring in, the Faiza Shaheen situation within the Labour Party. There's, the responses we've seen to the Palestine protests. There are wider statistics in the country, the rise of protests like the one you're at right now. But, give me your sense of the state of Islamophobia in the UK today, because I would love to hear. I personally feel that it's as bad as I've ever remembered it, bar after 7/7. But what are your thoughts? What's the state of Islamophobia in the UK today, and how's it showing up?
Thanks, Myriam, and thanks to the other speakers. I guess to start, it is very relevant that, the rise of the far right, I think it's very much connected to the rise of Islamophobia. Tommy Robinson, for people who aren't aware, is a fascist. He launched the English Defence League, which was a far-right organisation, fascist organisation, the Football Lads Alliance, which is another kind of football hooligans and fascists. And his real rhetoric is, kind of piggybacking off of Islamophobia in society, and the Islamophobia, I think, that's pushed out by the top of society particularly. He had a big campaign around grooming gangs. I think this is probably something that we're familiar with if we know about Islamophobia. It's like a frequent Islamophobic trope that that Muslim men are, groomers or sexist, or that Islam harbors, paedophilia or sexism and all these things. So he kind of used that to launch a lot of his career. Obviously, like, complete lies. This is the same lies we see in the media about, like, the Rochdale grooming gangs in Britain and so on. Using that to attack particularly Pakistani men. It's like false, completely false. It's also something that Suella Braverman herself, who was our ex Home Secretary, said. She played into this as well when she said that, the Pakistani men are the problem with grooming gangs. And if you look at the statistics for grooming, it is predominantly white men, as I think we'd expect. But, Suella Braverman is very happy to spread hate-filled lies and so on. And I think, talking about Braverman and the Tories, I do think that it is the most racist government we have seen of recent times. I mean, for me, I wasn't actually I was in the Middle East, living in the Middle East when it was the 7/7 bombings, and I was too young to remember 9/11. But for me, I think it's the most tangible atmosphere, toxic atmosphere of Islamophobia that I can remember. And I think a lot of that is due to the demonization of the Palestine movement. Like Rishi Sunak, our Prime Minister, coming out saying that that this is a mob, that people that stand with Palestine and against genocide are terrorists or terrorist supporters, and so on. Particularly attacking Palestine occupations and encampments, like the stuff that I've been involved in as a student, as anti-Semitic, and so on. Saying that our marches are full of hate. Obviously, this is incorrect. If Rishi Sunak is worried about stuff filled with hate, you can just look in the mirror. But I think this is really what has kind of propelled Islamophobia, I think, to kind of the dizzying heights we see today. But it is also connected to racism more widely, that is on the rise across society. The kind of racism that tries to distract from the cost of living crisis that we've got in Britain and so on. Attempts to divide. The Tories are not doing well at the moment. I think they're trying to kind of get a base within that, using that racist rhetoric to get a base, saying that it's not our fault that people are poor or oppressed and so on. It's it's refugees or it's Muslims and so on. People that are othered in society. And I think just to say about the connection to, I think, anti-refugee racism, because a big thing in Britain at the moment is this thing called the Rwanda Plan, which is the Tories' obsession with trying to deport refugees to Rwanda, a place that they themselves, agree is unsafe. The Tories have made statements previously about, the horrible history of human rights abuses in Rwanda, and still they are set on this project. It's a complete farce and a lie, that this is going to, stop refugees from coming to Britain. In reality, it's just going to mean that more refugees die in the Channel and there's less safe ways to get here. But I think that Islamophobia and anti-refugee rhetoric often are in the same ideological terrain. It's about refugees being different, Muslims being different, not being able to fit into society, about British values and so on. These are the kind of, I think, increasingly we're seeing, these things talked about that, that Muslims are, don't have the same values as us, that London's turning into Londistan. These are things that wouldn't have been acceptable a few years ago, I don't think, but we're seeing the kind of barrier breakdown between, our government taking up more racist rhetoric, and obviously, the papers and the front pages goes with that. And I think, just talking about the media is, should I stop?
Yeah, no, we'll come back to that.
Okay.
Obviously, we'll circle back to the ways in which these kind of deteriorations in the representation of Muslims in policy, in politics, in public discourse is then manifested in the types of stories that we see, predominantly in the media, not just in the UK, but I think across Europe. And I'd like to bring Lulu in at this point to talk about the ways in which the far right is influencing this sort of rise in Islamophobia. And I really would love to, obviously we know that, Viktor Orban's government in Hungary was one that was not just deeply anti-immigrant, but also deeply Islamophobic. Islamophobic groups, violent Islamophobic groups have flourished, particularly in Eastern Europe, but I think also now increasingly in Europe. We're seeing attacks on mosques, on Muslim cemeteries. I was just reading just now that the Tel Mama, which is one of the UK organizations that monitors Islamophobia, had seen a 600 figures go from 600 to over 2,000 attacks in a month. So the largest spike in anti-Muslim attacks since they began taking records. And so I just really want to get a sense from you, Lulu, as an Albanian Muslim, are you seeing the impact and this rise of the far right and the way that it's impacting wider conversations around Muslims and what they represent within our societies here in Europe?
Yeah, thank you, Myriam. Basically, I can say that for me, born and raised in Albania, as I mentioned before, I have been facing a huge judgmental from Albanian people while I was basically living in Albania. And shortly, I really want to tell my story because it's very important to understand that why people living in Eastern countries, especially mentioned Albania, Kosovo,
We're sort of struggling
three
to
countries.
Is it just me, or
really
can everyone hear you okay?
Yes, we are struggling.
Yeah. Lulu, we're sort of struggling to hear you properly. I'm not sure if your connection's come out. Do you want to?
How about now? Is it better now, or is still cutting off?
Much better now. We can hear you clearly. Please pick up where you.
Oh, okay. Okay, so I don't know if you guys heard me, but I was just saying that being born and raised in Albania, I really want to start from here because I can say that people who are born in, I would mention 3 East European countries, which is Albania, Bosnia, and Kosovo, that are 3 countries that have the largest Muslim people that live that are Muslims. Basically, me having an education in media, I started basically to love being part of media, being a host. So I decided basically I'll become a TV host, and I want to be part of this beautiful world as media. But then at the same time, I put the hijab on. So my story starts from here because I started facing discrimination from my own family. Even put the hijab on, and had a conversation with him why you don't want to speak to me, why you don't want me to put the hijab on. He was just ignoring the fact that for me this is important, and just saying that I think that you will not have a future if you put the hijab on, because I want to mention that most East European countries, they have been basically being part of communism for a long time. So our parents' generation and their parents have been basically taking these messages from the government that whoever is going to be a Muslim is either ignorant.
Oh, sorry, we've just lost you again, Lulu. Not sure. Should we give you a little minute to see if you can sort out your connection, and we'll come back to that point if that's all right. Samina, let's talk a little bit about contemporary issues and how kind of Islamophobia is being affected by the most recent events in the Middle East, specifically Israel's assault on Gaza and the sort of gaslighting that we've seen in the media of the reality of what's happening on the ground there, which of course affects communities in multiple ways, and I'd really love the panel to talk to us about not just sort of the direct ways in which the media discourse feeds forms of anti-Muslim hatred, things like, attacks on individuals or mosques. But I also would love to touch on how this affects community relations. I'm struck by the notion, for example, that You know, I think about the macro so oftentimes as just a bigger version of the micro, right? And in a relationship with anyone, if you're saying one thing and I'm telling you, we're both looking at the same thing, and you're telling me you see green and I see red, and we're unable to connect on what we're actually seeing, that has a profound impact on our ability to relate to one another. If you can't see what I see, are we even on the same planet? And I think particularly for many Muslims, it feels like our humanity has been the absence of the recognition of humanity of Muslims, even though this is of course a conflict that affects primarily Palestinians, so both Christians and Muslims, and of course the whole gamut in between. I do like to emphasize that Palestinians are people, and therefore they are of all you know, religions and no religions, right? But to get to my point, I was sort of, I sense that there is something that we are experiencing as a community globally right now around a feeling that the absence of humanity afforded to Muslims has never ever been clearer. And whether those Muslims are actually Muslims or just Arabs who are perceived as Muslims, it's the same thing. It's a sense that Muslim blood is cheap, Muslim lives are cheap, and that doesn't just affect them over there, it affects how we feel here in our own societies. So Samina, sorry, over to you. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, thank you for asking a very valid question. As I said when I started my initial introduction, that after what happened in Israel on the 7th of October, which I think was, you know, we can take a simple view that it was not fair to human beings that were attacked. But after that, what happened to people in Gaza, that's obviously also gone beyond the limit that even, you know, teaching international politics, I would think there's a limit beyond which states shouldn't go and attack civilians, knowing fully well that while they're trying to control militancy or whatever other threat, that there is a collateral damage. So this has gone beyond that. But I think when we're looking at how it's impacted on Islamophobia, as I'd mentioned, there's an Islamophobia register in Australia, which was started by two, at least first, a very sort of vibrant young Muslim woman from, I think, Afghanistan, and has also been joined by other very young and vibrant women. Some of them I know, and we've been working with them. And so the Islamophobia register actually tells us that the incidence of Islamophobic acts of feelings among Muslims has increased. Now, you could say that because the whole idea is that it's a self-reporting process. So those who feel more about Islamophobia are the ones who are going to come online and say that they're being threatened. And so there could be a self-selection in the process, but I think there is no doubt that there has been increasing. I think
somebody needs to mute their microphone.
So there isn't a doubt about the fact that there is a reaction against Muslims. And you're right, because at one level, people actually forget that Palestinians are not all Muslims. There are Palestinian Muslims and they're Christians, and there are other people who go in there as well. And so it's a mixed picture, but it's being presented and it's being seen as very clear between Islam and the other, in this case, the state of Israel. So that's definitely created tensions, and we can feel that. But I think we need to be very aware, and I don't know, maybe it's a different scene elsewhere. In Australia, it's been also a very positive impact. So it's countered Islamophobia, because I've just finished teaching a unit on Islam and world politics, where the students study international politics and they see how different events shape how Muslims are seen or what Muslims do. And I was surprised that a lot of those young people, who are mostly not from the Muslim background, were of the view that given what is happening in Gaza, their sympathies with Islam and Muslims as representatives of the Palestinian nation has increased. So they're more sympathetic, and I think the whole process of encampment that we see around the world indicates that. So there are two different trends that we can see. But then let's come to the question, which is the political question, that do people, Muslims or non-Muslims, have a right and are free to state what they really think about what's happening in Gaza? Can they be critical? And I think that's where the division comes up. Because what I've noticed is that since 7th of October, there's self-censorship that's been going on, because there's some people who are just worried that because it's being seen as Islam versus the state of Israel, that they don't want to be in a position where they're being targeted. And let's also accept that there are groups that are very strong and they do try and target people. And then there, of course, as Dr. Awad was saying, the people who are ignorant, but they get these ideas. And so when somebody comes up with a very valid argument that what's happening in Israel, what Israel is doing is not right, they don't look at it as a sense of concern of what's happening. They look at it as a Muslim problem. And so therefore the responses become very negative. So if we look at the Twitter or X now, I'm amazed every time I see anyone criticizing what's happening in Israel, what's happening in Gaza by the state of Israel. It attracts a lot of very harsh anti-Muslim rhetoric. So I think that the way I look at it is that what's happened after 7th of October and with the merciless killings of people in Gaza, there's been a positive impact undermining Islamophobia, but then there's also been magnification of the process.
Yeah, well, I really want to pick up on the point around the silencing experience by Muslims in the wake of the Israel's assault on Gaza. And of course, Nihad, I particularly would like to bring you into this equation because there's some suggestion that we are looking at a McCarthyite atmosphere where actually the Islamophobia that we are experiencing as Muslims in a more direct way is also now impacting anyone who expresses solidarity with Muslims. So I'm thinking the extent to which the student encampments have been met with forms of structural violence that are connected to other conflict, you know, particularly, for example, the NYPD training, of course, with the IDF or the IOF rather. And so I'm just wondering to what extent you feel that the current situation in Gaza and the Palestinian territories is contributing to bringing to the fore the sort of ways in which Islamophobia has controlled and silenced communities, and now is doing that perhaps even beyond the Muslim community. I mean, what's your thoughts on that and some of what Samina was saying?
Sorry, was that directed at me?
That was for Nihad.
Oh, sorry.
Definitely come to you after that, Samira, yes.
No worries, I just heard a bit of silence, so I was scared I misheard.
No, appreciated. Nihad, please.
Yeah. I mean, definitely Samira's point of view is very important, and I would love to hear from her, Lulu, and also Dr. Samina again. Look, we are witnessing a seismic shift in American psyche, and the reason for this is very obvious. There is now, the conflict is generational conflict, not only generational, but also two mindsets. You have the old dogmatic generations who have been brought up on hating Muslims, Palestinians and others, and even other minorities who really do not see the faces of the victims. They only adopt the perspective and point of view of the oppressor, of the bigger, of the stronger, of the, you know, the powerful. And that has been really the story of the issue of Palestine. The dehumanization of the Palestinians did not just start since October 7th. It has been even prior to the creation of the state of Israel on the land of Palestine, through the Hollywood movies, Jack Shaheen. I wish you can Google Professor Jack Shaheen. He wrote a beautiful book called Real Arab, and Real Arab is REEL, not REAL. So he was analyzing the images that Hollywood has produced of Muslims, Arabs, and Palestinians over almost 80 years. And you will be astonished to see how systematic, how scientific the negative portrayal of Palestinians, Arabs, and Muslims for obvious political and scientific reasons that serves really the agenda and interest of the State of Israel and the colonial powers. The reason I'm saying this is generations have been brought up and have been brainwashed to perceive Palestinians not as the victims, but the victimizers. Another book I wish people can read is by Edward Said, the late Professor Edward Said, Blaming the Victims, or The Question of Palestine. Read those things. And that really leads me to the point where the young generation of Americans who are exposed to flood of information from the internet, unlike their older generations, their older parents and grandparents who have been brought up only watching CBS News, Fox News, and so on. This generation is free because they get their information from the internet. And this genocide is being broadcast live, unlike any other genocide in human history. So that helped this current generation to see that what's happening today in Gaza, in the West Bank, in other places, nothing but a genocide, and no one can argue against it except those dogmatic generation and their politicians and the mainstream media and the establishment who would like and continue to portray the falsehood of what's taken place. So that the impact of this on all of us is really not only intergenerational, but also intersectional. You see, the Palestinian movement is the same movement that supports Palestinians that has supported Black Lives Matter and has opposed the immigration policies that was led by Donald Trump and his comrades. So today we see that this seismic shift in the perception and portrayal of the Palestinians has its also impact on Islam and Muslims, because people who are watching what's taking place in Gaza, they see the reaction of the people of Gaza to this tremendous and unbelievable genocidal campaign against them, and how they respond to the loss of lives, to the injuries, to the deprivation, to the destruction, to the starvation. They submit to the will of God and say, you know what? Our connection to this goes beyond our suffering. We are connected to God. We believe in Him. We will do our best. We have done our best. We resisted the best we can, and we are not going to be uprooted from our land. And we'd rather die in this land than just becoming another time refugees. So that faith that has been demonstrated by the Palestinian mothers and children. Speaking of children, the children of Gaza are exceptional. When they speak like adults. They speak like mature people. Although I'm a Palestinian myself, and I am the product of that culture, the children of Gaza and the mothers of Gaza and the parents of Gaza truly have transformed even my faith and have revived a lot of my connection with God. And I believe they have inspired people all over the world, and that had led so many people to not only look favorably at Islam, but even wanted to be a Muslim. They want to have that similar faith. And we have seen many influencers and celebrities, which I believe helped not only humanize the Palestinians, but humanize Islam. So in America, where we are now, there is a conflict between the establishment and the student movement and the public, who 70% of them believe in a permanent ceasefire. However, unfortunately, only 8% of politicians heed that call, and that shows the massive power the pro-Israel organizations have over politicians, but they have lost control over the attitudes of the public.
The public opinion, yeah, public opinion has shifted very dramatically, and I think obviously the most clearest sign of that in the US context obviously being that support for Israel is no longer a bipartisan issue. This is the first time, certainly in my lifetime, I think the first time ever, given that Israel isn't really that old, and actually Biden is older than the state of Israel. But on that note, I just wanted to ask Lulu about this situation where, with regards to, we're seeing these alliances, these very strange alliances between the far right and some kind of Islamophobic, groups that claim to be in support of Israel and in support of Jewish people. And I find this always really odd, because I'm looking, for example, at someone, Netanyahu, talking about the idea that he protects the Judeo-Christian civilization whilst bombing some of the oldest churches in Gaza, some of the oldest churches in the world. I'm looking at the people who march, for example, in France together against anti-Semitism, includes far-right people who have a really long history of deep anti-Semitism. I'm talking Holocaust denial, I'm talking virulent, violent anti-Semitic statements. And so I'm just really confused at these alliances that seem to be emerging, where it's like Islamophobia seems to bring together some very odd marriages. Lulu, is this something you've observed, and how do you think that's changing Islamophobia as we understand it? I'm going to disappear from view. I can still hear you, but I need to recharge my computer.
Yeah, no worries. I hope I don't disconnect this time. But very shortly, Mary, before I go to your question, I don't know how much were you guys able to hear me before, but I just wanted to say something related with my personal story. I think it's important to bring in the table the fact that where we come from. So being part of Eastern, like being an Eastern European, I want to bring in table the fact that the way how our parents basically educated us, because it's very important education that we get from our teachers, from our parents, and then it's difficult for some of us as students or as an adults to change the mentality that our parents raised us with, or our teachers raised us with. So being Eastern European, we have been always raised with the mentality of Islam, being an Islamophobic. Even why I mentioned before that Albania, Kosovo, and Bosnia are 3 countries with the largest Muslim number, and we have been suffering a lot when it comes to protecting our religion. In Kosovo, 96% of people are Muslims, and the majority of them are practicing. Because when I tell people that I'm originally from Albania, they don't believe me. They're like, oh wow, because I don't know that Albanians have Muslim covered girls. They are not used to see this in Europe, like Eastern Europe. So I always explain to them that the majority of people, even why they are Muslims, are just Muslims by name. They don't practice Islam. They don't have any information about Islam, because during the years, as I mentioned, being part of communism for so long, our parents have always been raised with fear. Our grandparents, they have been fasting without telling the fact that they were fasting. Basically, they were hiding the fact that they were fasting. So when I decided, for example, to put the hijab on, my neighbors, they were like asking me, but how are you going to get married now? So look at the mentality that they have in their mind. They think that a Muslim girl with hijab now, the opportunity to get married, imagine, is less than other girls, or the education that you will have in the future is less than a normal girl, basically. And I can share the fact that because I have been part of the media, I can say that when I used to work as a travel agency manager and part of communication department, when I was speaking with people on the phone, trying to basically collaborate or having a meeting or having the virtual communication over the phone without like the view, everything was fine. Yeah, like the way how we communicated with each other was perfect. And then when you go and meet these people in person, you see that there is kind of discrimination since the way how they basically welcome you. They're like, oh, is you Lulu? Like Lulu that I was speaking on the phone, like it's you. Oh, and I'm like, why are you surprised? And they will say it without even being embarrassed, like, oh, I wasn't expecting you to be with hijab. And when you ask them why, they're like, because we are not used to see this. We are not they think basically they have a mentality that Muslim covered girls, they can't be part of the media, they can't articulate, they can't be educated, they can't be part of any field that is visible on the screen, like, I don't know, teacher or working in the bank or basically they have this old mentality. Even now it's like 2024, and for them being covered with hijab, you will have definitely less opportunities especially when it comes to media. You don't have a girl with hijab presenting in the screen, and even if you are a part of a panel, like giving your opinion, you will be discriminated from the way how they welcome you till the end, because she is with hijab. And Alhamdulillah, recently, I have always said, thanks God we have social medias that will show the real Muslims in the world. And I would also connect this with what's happening in Gaza as well, because being a part of Islam Channel team, being a producer, we have broadcasting like a huge amount of events that have been happening around the world. And there are so many videos, especially I would mention the fact that some of the hostages that Hamas basically was holding, they have taken their own phone, they have made the video, they told the world how the Hamas treated them in a very amazing way. Like, they gave them food. It's not like what they are saying. It's not how the world is seeing it on normal live streaming media. It's different. Basically, they are saying it, and then these videos that we have them on the records are deleted. Like, I see myself how I find a video which has been posted 3 minutes ago, and then after like 5 minutes I can't find it, because what's happening, propaganda, especially in media, is horrible. It's like they don't want to show the world how amazing is being a Muslim, and how the real Muslims treat, even in this case, like hostages, because a hostage is a hostage. But
I'm just going to cut you there, Lulu. Lulu, I'm just going to cut you there because I'm conscious we need to go to the Q&A, and also I do have to add that's okay. I also do need to add the caveat that, of course, what the criticism of those videos is that the individuals at hand were under duress and would not have been able to manifest any other emotions at that point. So I think we also have to just be a little bit cautious about any kind of video that's coming out. I understand your point, but you know, who knows what they were really going through at that point. Sorry?
If I can just quickly interject in here, I think it's important for us to understand that given the sadness and, you know, the bad situation that's happening in Gaza, we need as Muslims to be aware and careful that we don't link everything to what's happening there and not read it negatively in all its forms, because I think, as I had said, there's also some positive that's coming out of that, and we need to be happy about that and not build in a sense of victimization.
Okay, thank you, Samina. So one of the questions that we have from the audience, which I was hoping, Samina, you might actually be able to respond to, is this one around, can the speakers explain the difference between legitimate criticism of Islam in the same way other religions are criticized and hatred towards Muslims, which is different and involves living people, and which I think is wrong? So I think, look, to many Muslims, this might feel like a very obvious question, but I think it's an important one maybe for people outside of the community who are concerned that maybe if they say anything negative about Islam, that could be perceived as Islamophobia. So Samina, how do people navigate that? Because they should be allowed to criticize Islam, of course, right? And are actually very allowed, because there's a hell of a lot of negative things said about Islam, just to be clear, because this is often shrouded in the idea that you can't say anything about Islam. And I'm like, you guys say everything about Islam. You do everything and you say everything. So I'm not sure what it is that you're fighting for, but please, Samina, explain to us those lines.
I've got a slightly different opinion on that. I think when we talk about a religion, whether it's Islam, Christianity, Judaism, Hinduism, Sikhism, you name it, they're the religions with certain principles, certain ideas. And I think in essence, they all promote the same idea, which is the hashtag for our event, for MACFEST. It's the people who practice that religion that we need to focus on. So it's not Islam, it's the Muslims and how they live their religion that can be criticized. Because the moment you go into the religious teachings and you start criticizing that, I think that despite the fact that we accept that there are different levels of religiosity, even among Muslims, hitting at those core values, for example, saying that Quran is created, or some would go and burn Quran or be very blasphemous about Prophet Muhammad, I think that goes into a space that others need to avoid as much as Muslims need to avoid when we are talking about other religions. So it's not Islam, criticism of Islam. Can we criticize how people read Islam and practice it? I think everybody has a right to do that, because we can't, in all fairness, justify misogyny. We can't justify the fact that some young women or old women are subjected to violence. You know, there was just a recent case yesterday, or in fact this morning, in Pakistan, that young Italian Pakistani girl who was murdered a few years ago. Her mother has been found and now she'd be taken to Italy. The young woman was killed just because she didn't want to get married. Now, obviously, there's a cultural element, but there was also the sense that you're a Muslim. Can we criticize that? Of course we can criticize. Can we criticize the elements within Muslim community that say that it's not allowed to participate in elections anywhere in the non-Muslim world? Of course we can criticize that. Can we criticize the fact that we somehow seem to think among some people that you can't pray for a deceased person if he or she happens to be a non-Muslim? The practices, the lived religious experiences, they're open to criticism. But I think the sacrosanct, sacred spaces that Muslims hold dear to them, as much as other religious spaces, I think they don't need to be attacked. That's where those who are critical of Muslim practices, they need to be careful about how they approach that. And again, it's especially important because in today's age, because the social media enables people to copy that and then distribute, now one message that comes from one person in a small gathering can really go viral and then contribute to tensions, and therefore then can backfire in the form of real Islamophobia.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much, Samina. So I wanted to ask Nihad the next question, which was quite a pessimistic response that we received from someone saying, sorry to be pessimistic, but it's really a losing battle. Millennia of anti-Semitism in Europe only ended with the Holocaust. We've seen 4 genocides of Muslims in Europe in the last 30 years: Bulgaria, Bosnia, Kosovo, Chechnya. and it hasn't lessened anti-Muslim bigotry one bit. We are the enemy du jour, and that's not changing anytime soon. Too many powerful nations and states, media entities have an interest in continuing that. Nihad, I want to put that to you because I think actually this statement echoes how a lot of people feel when you look around the world, you know, from China to Russia, via Europe and the US. It feels like everywhere you look, it's Muslims, you know, the Rohingya, you know, everywhere you look, it seems like Muslims are being targeted, and it can feed a sense of kind of a global witch hunt on Muslims. Is that how you see it?
I'll be happy to answer this question, but if you may allow me, I just wanted to add to what Dr. Samina has said quickly. Yeah. You know, if I can go a little bit, maybe even deeper from my personal perspective, I think there's a lot of freedom within Islam, even to criticize Islam, not from a point of view of hostility, but curiosity and freedom of thought. In Islam, there is people will be, including some Muslims, when you read the Quran, you will see the vast space of intellectual freedom and independence that are granted for people. So there's a very clear set of ayat or verses in the Quran that says there's no compulsion in religion. You cannot force or impose on people, whether, you know, thought or faith or any intellectual discourse. People are free to choose, are free not only to think, but to disagree. In the Quran, God allowed Satan to disagree and to disobey. So even the angels, they ask questions. So that freedom is there in Islam. If it comes from a personal space of curiosity and even disagreement, it is there. Where it's prohibited in all spaces, in all religions, in all logical and ideological forums, is, you know, prejudice, hostility, and call for violence. Beyond that, people are encouraged to be curious, to be self-critical, and to have a critical mind. And that really what distinguishes Islam is the logical thinking and the will to think freely and free to choose. And I conclude by saying that in the Quran, God says, you are free to choose to believe or to disbelieve. So the freedom of intellectual discussion is there in Islam, and that's why Islamic civilization flourished, because it has liberated the human spirit to expand and explore the potential. Now, from this perspective, back to your question, Dr. Myriam, Islamophobia is global, is transnational, and it is very dangerous, not only to Muslims, but to peace, world peace around the world, and even in societies where Muslims are minorities or perceived as the other. However, I believe my recommendation, my advice to myself and to my fellow Muslims and others, we should not be defined by Islamophobia. Islamophobia is trying to define us and box us to limit our potential and our success. We should never allow us to be defined as the victims, although we may be victimized, but we should not adopt the victimization mentality, because we are destined as Muslims, as believers, to be كنتم خير أمة أخرجت للناس. You have been the best community brought out to the world. So we believe in service to the others, we love others, and we are here as inshallah, an extension of the message of the Prophet, being a mercy to the world. We don't even live for ourselves. We live to serve others, Muslims and non-Muslims, or people of other faith or no faith. So I believe if Muslims continue to adopt this mentality, they will continue to succeed, and they will adopt the best ways to deal with conflicts with the opposition and with ignorance as far as the reality of the genocides or potential genocides that Muslim minorities go through, whether Myanmar, Muslims in Myanmar, what we see in the pipeline, what appears to be almost a genocide in the making in India, and the discrimination that people face, whether in France and in other parts of the world. Definitely, this requires not only a Muslim unity, but a human unity to defend the oppressed people and put economic, political, and social pressure on communities who persecute other minorities within their own control just for the sake of prejudice or false sense of superiority. So many times humanity has suffered when we failed to act as the human race by protecting the most vulnerable among us. And if it's our time, we Muslims should be also in the service and the protection of other people. So today it's our turn, but I believe the best way is to continue even to protect other people and be in those spaces where they need us. I believe this is inshallah, the best way to deal not only with conflict, but to prevent conflict from happening and from continuing.
Thank you very much, Nihad. Last question to you, Lulu. Lulu, could you give us a sense of what, given what we're seeing in terms of the rise of Islamophobia globally, but also some of the hope that Samina has injected, you know, the idea that there are some positive changes happening, what is it you would like to see happening in order to challenge the Islamophobia that we're seeing, and what are some of the most effective ways people can contribute to sort of supporting Muslims against this at this time?
Yeah, so basically we live in democracy now, and everyone has the freedom of speech and to do whatever they want. So I think we need to use this as our power. And I have always said also on my interviews that it's very important for us to do what we really believe, and to not be defined from what people believe, from what people say, from what the world as well believe. So I do think that what's happening now in the world, especially from social media, people are changing their mentality. They are learning more about Islam. They are reading the Quran. So those people who don't know anything about Islam, who everything that they know is from their parents or from what they heard, I do believe that now they are getting a chance, especially from what's happening in the world, especially what's happening in Gaza. They are basically saying to themselves, oh wait, this is very serious, let me have a look on it. So they are starting to do more research, they are starting to read more. And my message today is read. Everyone who is in the world and who has questions and who don't really understand what's going on, or they have their own doubts, the best way how to know and to realize what's happening is to read, is what our Lord as well, it's the first word that our Prophet ﷺ got from Angel Jibreel, is like Iqra. So if we all read, I'm sure that deep down there, they're going to find the right information. And what I can say is the advice that I have given to myself: don't be afraid to do what you want and to be who you want to be. So do believe in yourself, do believe in your faith. And I do believe that if every one of us puts God first and what they want to do in life, and then they can achieve and they can be successful. Do not be afraid of being hijabi or saying loudly that I'm Muslim and I protect what my religion basically makes me be or makes me feel.
Fabulous. Well, look, that leaves me just to thank you, Nihad, Samina, Lulu, and of course Samira, who is at the protest against the far right, literally, you know, proving that Islamophobia isn't something we just discuss in virtual forums, but something that requires a pushback on the ground. So we salute Samira for her on the ground actions. Any final words, Nihad, Samina, Lulu? I'm going to give you just 2 minutes to wrap up, and any final words for the audience. Thank you. Nihad, if you want to kick us off. You'll need to unmute first.
Look, we are living in a pivotal moment in our lives and in history. We are witnessing and living a genocide as we speak now. As I'm speaking to you, I'm sure I don't have to remind you, there are bombs raining on innocent people in Gaza. 10 years from now, people will say, yeah, this happened. What was I doing? What was I thinking? Where did I stand? Was I on the sideline? Did I say anything? Never underestimate who you are and what you do and what you say, regardless whether you are in a remote area, in a city, in whether you think you are the most powerful person or the least powerful person. You are powerful, and you can change this course of history. Never underestimate even your own feeling within your family, within your circles of influence, in the workplace, in the school, in the shopping place. Say the truth and keep talking about Gaza, because you have to be part of the solution. Otherwise, you are part of the genocide. So I'll leave you with this. Do all you can not to be part of this sad moment in man's history. Inshallah. Thank you.
Thank you, Nihad. Samina?
Well, my sort of parting words would be that yes, what's happening in Gaza is something that we probably is impacting on everyone. And we need to be aware of the fact that it's Muslims being impacted, but there are others who are not Muslims are also being impacted. But I think we need to remember that over a long period, how we form coalitions with others who are willing to come on board and understand what's happening in the Muslim space is likely to shift the nature of Islamophobia a bit. And the other bit that I do want to focus on again is that Islamophobia is essentially an exclusionary process where Muslims are somehow excluded from the broader theme of discussion. And where it is real, we need to call it out. But we also need to be careful not to excessively perceive Islamophobia to be there when it isn't there, and not assume that Islamophobia only impacts on those who openly subscribe to traditional Islamic dress code, because I think it also impacts on people who may not follow that dress code, but somehow feel the impact of people not trusting Muslims or not viewing Muslims, fairly. And we also need to understand that there is the global linkage among people who are Islamophobic, which I think, Dr. Nihad, Awad, you were talking about in terms of the organized Islamophobia. I think that has got also very negative impact. For example, what happened in New Zealand in 2019 of people being killed, that was the end product. So we need to work with those we can bring with us to counter Islamophobia, but also work for peace.
Thank you so much. And Lulu, final 2 minutes, over to you.
Yeah, very quickly, I would say that the test that it's happening to people in Gaza, it's for us, it's not for them. And I will end up with the hadith that our Prophet ﷺ says that Muslim brothers and sisters in Islam, they are connected to each other as organs in the body. If one of the organs is sick, let's say, for example, my heart is sick, then the other organs will be impacted and they will become sick as well. So this is the way how we need to see not only the relationship that we need to have with what's happening in Gaza to our brothers and sisters there, but also to the whole world. Muslims need to be connected with each other. We need to help each other. We need to show the world what our religion teaches us and who are we as Muslims in the world. That's it. I was just very short because I know that we need to go.
Fabulous. All right. Well, look, that leaves me once again to thank all of you for being part of today's panel. Thank you to the audience for joining us today. And also, of course, a big thank you to MACFEST for organizing. Over to you, Katerina.
Myriam, thank you so much. Is there anything Kezra would like to say? I know she's stepping in at the end. In our panel, Kezra.
What can I say? I've learned so much. You've been an amazing panel of speakers, particularly talking about a difficult subject, a very challenging time you're going through. Thank you so much. We couldn't have asked for an amazing panel as this. And Myriam, you've been terrific as always. Thank you so much, Lulu, for joining us at the last minute, and for Samira, wonderful Samira, all the way live. And thank you to all the audience, many of friends and colleagues. I've been sending them the links, and you know what, their friends, they've all joined, and fantastic event. It's very important for us to continue this discussion wherever you are. We are living through a very, very difficult time. And my message, as always, will be, as MACFEST says, we need to remain united. We need to remain connected. We need to harbor no hatred. It's not a fight between Muslim and Jews. It's a political fight. It's about land. It's about Israel. So I have a lot of Jewish friends, and they're dear to me. My own team is 4 of them are Jewish. They're here. Susie's here. Barbara's here. And they're going through a very difficult time. And we need to remember that, really. And what else can I say? Just a very important topic. We host it every year, and we will have another panel next year. Keep the conversation going, and have a wonderful Saturday afternoon. We really appreciate it, because you're joining us from right across the world, including Yvonne. He's sitting in Jakarta, and he's going to offer us Indonesian festival. Please join us. And tomorrow, Katarzyna is going to tell you about tomorrow's event. So thank you once again, everyone.
Yes, thank you so much. And just a few announcements. So we've got 2 live events coming up in Manchester. One is on Sunday, 9th of June, our Migrant Stories with Manchester Histories Festival. The other one is on Saturday, 22nd of June. It's the musical evening at the Lowry in Salford in Manchester. Please take a look on Eventbrite. We've got more information there. And of course, the link to buy the tickets. And then we've got 2 Zoom events coming up. Books with Sefi Atta, hello from the USA, on Saturday the 15th of June. And then fascinating event, Indonesian Culture and Heritage, on Sunday 16th of June. And now tomorrow we've got Islam and Caring for the Natural World. And I can tell you from last year, it's going to be a really interesting event. We've got brilliant speakers again. So thank you for being with us today. Hopefully see you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.